What you're about to witness happened in a hospital where science reigns supreme and miracles are dismissed as coincidence. Boston General Hospital 2023, where one of America's most respected cardiac surgeons was about to have his entire worldview shattered. Time of death, 3:42 p.m. Note the patient did not respond to resuscitation efforts after 47 minutes of cardiac arrest. Dr. Michael Stevenson, Chief of Cardiology, had pronounced thousands of deaths in his 25-year career. As a third-generation atheist and published critic of religious interference in medicine, he prided himself on his scientific objectivity. But that day, something impossible happened, something that no medical journal would ever publish, yet hundreds witnessed. What turned a lifelong atheist into a reluctant believer? What happens when a man of science is confronted with something his education tells him cannot exist? Stay with me until the end to discover how one moment changed not just the life of a dying patient, but the soul of a doctor who had spent his career denying the very possibility of miracles. Before I continue this extraordinary story, I want to personally invite you to be part of our Jesus Intervened community. These testimonies of divine intervention are changing lives around the world. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss the miracles we share each week. If this video touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Now let's dive into how a renowned atheist doctor's life was forever changed when Jesus intervened. Doctor. Michael Stevenson's credentials were impeccable. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, pioneering research in cardiac regeneration, and a wall of awards that testified to his brilliance. At 52, he stood at the pinnacle of his profession, respected by colleagues, feared by medical students, and sought after by patients wealthy enough to afford his expertise. My father was a physicist, my mother a neurologist, Michael would later recall. In our house, God was a fiction created by people too afraid to face reality. I was raised to believe only in what I could measure, test, and verify. The human body was a complex machine, nothing more, nothing less. His atheism wasn't passive, it was foundational to his identity. He'd written scathing academic papers on the delusion of divine healing and regularly debated religious physicians about keeping superstition out of medicine. He required his team to use precise mechanical language. Patients didn't pass away, their organs ceased functioning. There was no beyond, just the permanent end of biological processes. Behind his professional certainty lay personal tragedy. His wife Sarah had died of the very condition he now specialized in treating, an undiagnosed congenital heart defect that triggered sudden cardiac arrest. She collapsed while jogging on their 10th anniversary. Despite his frantic efforts to save her, she died in his arms. "That's when I knew for certain there was no God," he told a colleague once, in a rare moment of vulnerability. No benevolent creator would design a heart with a fatal flaw, then hide it until it kills someone. That's either incompetence or cruelty. Since there's no designer, it's just random biological misfortune, nothing more. His colleagues respected his brilliance, but found him cold, clinical, and occasionally cruel in his dismissal of patients' spiritual beliefs. Nurses quietly complained about his habit of mocking prayer or references to faith during rounds. Medical students feared his cutting ridicule of any unscientific thinking. What no one knew was how exhausting it was for Michael to maintain his perfect rational facade. How the certainty of meaningless existence sometimes kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his empty home. March 17th began like any other Tuesday. Dr. Stevenson arrived at 5:30 a.m., reviewed overnight cases, and prepared for his first surgery at 7 Harm Backed. The day's schedule was routine until an emergency interrupted his afternoon clinic. A cardiac patient in crisis was being rushed in by ambulance. Male, 34, Carlos Mendoza, construction worker, collapsed at job site. No pulse for approximately 12 minutes before CPR initiated, the paramedic reported rapidly. "We've been working on him for 20 minutes with no sustainable rhythm." Dr. Stevenson took command immediately, directing his team with practiced precision. The patient, a muscular Latino man with a wedding ring and a crucifix tattoo visible on his chest, showed classic signs of massive myocardial infarction. The monitors confirmed his heart was barely functioning despite aggressive intervention. What caught Dr. Stevenson's attention was the small group that had arrived with the ambulance, co-workers still in construction gear, covered in dust and clearly distraught. One older man was openly praying in Spanish, clutching rosary beads. "Either wait quietly in the designated area or leave," Dr. Stevenson instructed them sharply. "Your superstitions won't help him. We need space to work." For over 40 minutes, the cardiac team worked frantically to save Carlos. They administered multiple defibrillator shocks, emergency medications, and even attempted temporary pacing, all standard protocols executed flawlessly under Stevenson's direction. But the patient's heart continued to deteriorate. Carlos's wife Maria arrived during the resuscitation effort, her eyes red from crying, a small Bible clutched in her trembling hands. Dr. Stevenson barely acknowledged her presence as a nurse gently guided her to a corner of the room. "Doctor, please," Maria pleaded, her accented English breaking with emotion. "Carlos is a good man. We have 3 children. Please don't let him die." "We're doing everything medically possible," Dr. Stevenson replied without looking up, his voice detached. "But his heart has sustained catastrophic damage. You should prepare yourself for the likelihood that he won't survive." As the monitor showed increasingly sporadic electrical activity, Dr. Stevenson knew they were losing the battle. He'd seen this progression hundreds of times, the inevitable failure of a damaged heart despite all modern medicine could offer. At 3:42 p.m., after 47 minutes of continuous resuscitation efforts, he made the call that medical ethics demanded. "Time of death, 3:42 p.m., he announced, pulling off his gloves. Document full ACLS protocol was implemented without response. The room fell silent except for the soft sobbing of Maria Mendoza, who had collapsed into a chair, clutching her Bible to her chest and whispering prayers between tears. Dr. Stevenson turned to leave, already mentally composing the death certificate. Another case lost to biological reality, another family facing the finality of death. Just another Tuesday in cardiac medicine. What happened next would change everything. As Dr. Stevenson moved toward the door, Maria Mendoza rushed forward and grabbed his arm, her eyes desperate and pleading. "Doctor, please," she begged. "Just 1 minute more. Let me pray over my husband, please, just 1 minute." Irritation flashed across his face. This was precisely the kind of emotional, irrational response to death that he despised, the inability to accept biological reality. But something in her expression, perhaps its similarity to his own wife's face in her final moments, made him hesitate. 1 minute, he said coldly. "But he's gone, Mrs. Mendoza. Nothing is going to change that." The nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances as Maria approached her husband's body. Dr. Stevenson remained by the door, arms crossed, a study in scientific detachment. He would give her this moment of false comfort, then complete his paperwork and move on to living patients who could actually benefit from his expertise. Maria placed one hand on her husband's forehead and the other over his heart. With tears streaming down her face, she began to pray, first in English, then switching to Spanish as her emotions intensified. Dr. Stevenson couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the universal language of grief and desperate hope. "Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You promise that whoever believes in you will live, even after dying. Carlos believes. We need him here, Lord. Our children need their father. If it's your will, please bring him back to us. Let your power be shown in this place of science so they will know you are real. I believe you can. I believe you will. In your name, I pray." Dr. Stevenson checked his watch, ready to end this uncomfortable scene. That's when he noticed something that his scientific mind couldn't immediately process. The flatlined monitor emitted a single beep. Instinctively, he glanced at the machine, assuming a technical malfunction. Faulty equipment sometimes generated false readings after death. But before he could comment, the monitor beeped again and again. A rhythm was establishing, irregular at first, then gradually stabilizing. "That's impossible," he whispered, moving quickly back to the bedside. The cardiac rhythm continued to strengthen before his eyes. Without waiting for instruction, his team sprang back into action, checking vitals and reconnecting equipment they had just removed. "Blood pressure establishing," a nurse called out, her voice shaking with disbelief. 55/30, now 70/45. Dr. Stevenson grabbed his stethoscope and pressed it to Carlos's chest, needing physical confirmation of what the monitors were telling him. The heartbeat was there, weak but unmistakably present and growing stronger with each passing second. Maria continued praying, seemingly unsurprised by what was happening. "Thank you, Jesus," she repeated softly. "Thank you for hearing me." Then, as the medical team watched in stunned silence, Carlos Mendoza opened his eyes. "Maria," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The room erupted in chaos, nurses calling out vital signs, staff rushing in from the hallway alerted by the commotion, equipment being readjusted. But Dr. Stevenson stood frozen, unable to reconcile what he was witnessing with his understanding of cardiac medicine. People didn't come back after 47 minutes of failed resuscitation. They didn't flatline for nearly 3 minutes and then simply restart their hearts. The brain suffered irreversible damage after just 4-6 minutes without oxygen. What he was seeing violated everything he knew to be medically possible. As the team stabilized Carlos, Dr. Stevenson backed away, his mind racing to find a scientific explanation. Perhaps they had missed a faint rhythm. Maybe the equipment had failed to detect minimal electrical activity. There had to be a rational explanation, because the alternative was unthinkable. But what happened next shattered even these desperate rationalizations. Friends, what you're about to hear is the most extraordinary part of this testimony. Before we continue, I want to remind you that the Jesus Intervened channel exists to share these modern-day miracles with a world that desperately needs hope. If you haven't already, please subscribe now and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that Jesus still performs miracles today. Your support helps us reach more people with these powerful stories of divine intervention. Now let's return to what happened next in that Boston hospital room. As the medical team worked to stabilize Carlos, Dr. Stevenson retreated to the corner of the room, struggling to process what he had witnessed. His scientific mind raced through potential explanations, each more implausible than the last. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he barely noticed when Carlos began speaking more clearly. "I saw him," Carlos said, his voice surprisingly strong for someone who had been clinically dead minutes earlier. "He was waiting for me in the light." Maria squeezed her husband's hand, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Jesus? You saw Jesus?" Carlos nodded, his eyes clear and focused. "He told me it wasn't my time yet. He said my family still needed me and—" Carlos turned his head, looking directly at Dr. Stevenson in the corner, "and he said the doctor needed to see." A chill ran down Dr. Stevenson's spine as Carlos continued to stare at him with unnerving intensity. "He knows you, doctor," Carlos said. "He told me to tell you that Sarah is with him, and she's at peace." The room fell silent. No one on the medical staff knew about Dr. Stevenson's wife. He never discussed his personal life at work. The color drained from his face as he stepped forward, his scientific detachment crumbling. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your wife, Sarah. She died running, yes? Her heart." Carlos spoke with a certainty that was impossible for him to have. "Jesus said she didn't suffer, and she's waiting for you. He said you've been angry with him for taking her, but he never left you. Not even when you stopped believing." Dr. Stevenson's legs nearly gave way. A nurse quickly brought a chair as he sank down beside Carlos's bed, his professional composure completely shattered. "That's not possible," he stammered. "You couldn't know that. No one here knows about Sarah." Carlos's expression was gentle, without a trace of judgment. "He showed me while I was away. I saw a woman with red hair, laughing as she ran through a garden. She wore a silver necklace with a small heart pendant. Jesus said to tell you she still wears it." Dr. Stevenson covered his mouth with his hand, fighting back tears. The heart pendant had been his gift on their 5th anniversary, an anatomically correct heart rather than the traditional stylized version, a private joke between them about his profession. Sarah had been buried wearing it, a detail known only to him and the funeral director. "She's happy, Doctor," Carlos continued softly, "and Jesus said it's time for you to stop being angry. He's been waiting for you to see him." As if on cue, the room suddenly seemed to fill with an inexplicable brightness. Later, when staff members were interviewed about the event, they would struggle to describe it consistently. Some called it a strange light quality, others a shift in atmosphere. Still others a feeling of warmth that had no visible source. Dr. Stevenson would later describe it differently. It was like someone turned up the reality dial. Everything became more vivid, more present. And I felt, for the first time since Sarah died, that I wasn't alone. In that moment, as medical staff and patients' family members watched in astonishment, the renowned atheist physician buried his face in his hands and began to weep. Not the quiet, controlled tears of professional compassion, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to release decades of scientific certainty and personal grief. "I'm sorry," he repeated, though it wasn't clear to whom he was speaking. "I'm so sorry I didn't see." For several minutes, no one moved as the respected doctor experienced what he would later call the demolition and reconstruction of my entire reality. When he finally looked up, those present would describe his expression as transformed, as if some fundamental burden had been lifted. Carlos reached out and took Dr. Stevenson's hand in a gesture that reversed their patient-doctor roles. "He forgives you," Carlos said simply. "He always has." The events in room 342 quickly became impossible to contain. Within hours, the story of Carlos Mendoza's resurrection had spread throughout Boston General Hospital. By evening, the administration was struggling to manage the situation, issuing carefully worded statements about premature pronouncement of death and rare spontaneous recovery. But those who had been in the room knew better. 27 staff members had witnessed something that defied medical explanation, and the word miracle was being whispered in hospital corridors despite administrative warnings about maintaining scientific objectivity. "Dr. Stevenson, we need to get our story straight," the hospital's legal counsel advised during an emergency meeting. "I suggest we focus on equipment malfunction and possible oversight in detecting faint electrical activity. Under no circumstances should anyone be discussing supernatural explanations." Dr. Stevenson, still visibly shaken by his experience, looked around the table at his colleagues. For 25 years, he would have been the first to embrace such a rational explanation. Now he found himself unable to participate in what he suddenly recognized as a comfortable lie. "I pronounced him dead," he said quietly but firmly. "I've pronounced thousands of patients dead over my career. I don't make that kind of mistake. The equipment wasn't malfunctioning, his heart had stopped. And then after his wife prayed, it started again. After nearly 3 minutes of complete cardiac inactivity." The room fell uncomfortably silent as he continued. More importantly, he had information he couldn't possibly have known through any natural means. Specific details about my wife that no one at this hospital has ever been told. The chief of medicine leaned forward. "Michael, you've experienced an emotionally overwhelming event. Perhaps..." "Don't patronize me, Richard," Dr. Stevenson interrupted. "I'm not claiming to understand what happened today. I'm simply refusing to pretend it didn't happen." He stood up, straightening his lab coat. "You can craft whatever public statement makes legal happy, but I won't be participating in a cover-up of what I witnessed. I need some time off." Without waiting for a response, he walked out, leaving his stunned colleagues staring after him. Carlos Mendoza made a recovery that defied medical precedent. Despite extended cardiac arrest, he showed no neurological damage, no organ failure from oxygen deprivation. By all standard medical metrics, his survival, let alone his complete recovery, was impossible. When Dr. Stevenson visited him the following day, he found Carlos sitting up in bed, surrounded by his family. The man's eyes lit up with recognition as the doctor entered. "You look different today, Doctor," Carlos observed with a smile. Dr. Stevenson nodded. "I feel different." They spoke privately for nearly an hour. No one knows exactly what was said, but nurses reported seeing the distinguished physician listening intently, occasionally wiping tears from his eyes as Carlos spoke. When Dr. Stevenson finally emerged, He stopped by the nurse's station to make an unusual request. "Cancel all my appointments for the next 2 weeks," he instructed. "Family emergency." 3 days later, Michael Stevenson, the man who had built his identity on rational atheism, walked into a small community church near his home. He sat in the back row, unfamiliar with the rituals and songs, but desperate to understand the experience that had shattered his worldview. "I didn't have some dramatic conversion that day," he would later explain. "I didn't suddenly understand everything. But I knew I had witnessed something real, something that my scientific training couldn't explain away. And I knew I needed to follow that experience wherever it led." Carlos Mendoza was discharged after a week, with follow-up appointments scheduled to monitor his miraculous recovery. The hospital administration continued to downplay the incident, and most of the medical staff eventually accepted the official explanation of rare spontaneous recovery. But Dr. Michael Stevenson could not go back to his previous certainties. The man who had spent his career dismissing faith as a psychological crutch now found himself on an unexpected spiritual journey, one that would eventually transform not just his personal beliefs, but his entire approach to medicine. 6 months after the event, he established the Integrative Cardiac Care Initiative, a research program exploring the relationship between spiritual well-being and physical healing. His former colleagues were baffled by this apparent abandonment of scientific rigor, but patients began seeking him out, drawn by rumors of a cardiac surgeon who treated both the heart and the soul. "I haven't abandoned science," he explained to a skeptical journalist. "I've simply recognized its limitations. For years I mocked patients who talked about prayer or faith. I saw spirituality as a primitive attempt to explain what science hadn't yet mastered. Now I understand that science and faith aren't enemies. They're different languages describing aspects of the same reality." When asked if he believed an actual miracle had occurred in room 342, his answer reflected his new perspective. "As a physician, I witnessed a medical impossibility. As a human being, I experienced something that transcended my understanding of reality. Whether you call that a miracle or something else depends on your worldview. But I can tell you this. The man who walked into that hospital room isn't the same man who walked out, and I'm not talking about Carlos Mendoza." As for Carlos, he returned to construction work within 3 months, physically unaffected by his brief journey beyond life. He and his family became regular visitors to Dr. Stevenson's home, forming an unlikely friendship that bridged cultural, economic, and previously spiritual divides. "Do you ever doubt what happened, Dr. Tuart?" Stevenson asked Carlos once during a rare moment when they discussed the event directly. Carlos smiled, the fading sunlight illuminating his face. "Never, but I understand your doubts, Doctor. Before that day, I believed because my family raised me to believe. Now I know there's a difference." Dr. Stevenson nodded slowly. "The scientist in me still searches for explanations sometimes." "And what does the rest of you say?" Carlos asked. After a long moment, Dr. Stevenson replied that some questions are more important than their answers, and that sometimes seeing isn't about what your eyes tell you, it's about what your heart recognizes as true. Friends, the story you've just heard is one of many testimonies of divine intervention that we share on this channel. What happened in that Boston hospital room reminds us that Jesus continues to work in our modern world, even in the most unlikely places, even through the most unlikely people. If this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss our weekly testimonies. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. Your support allows us to continue bringing these powerful stories to people around the world. Remember, no heart is too hardened, no situation too hopeless, no scientific mind too certain for Jesus to intervene. Whether you're a believer seeking encouragement or a skeptic like Dr. Stevenson was, we welcome you to this community where modern miracles are documented and shared. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember that Jesus still intervenes today, just as he always has. One heart, one miracle, one transformed life at a time.